Jumpin' In on Manx Radio.
With Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
And welcome. And here we go, once again, would you believe, Saturday night, where is the time going? It's already getting darker, Christmas, blah, 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 blah. However, fear not, because it is time to sit back with a nice glass of something and enjoy the best sounds in modern and contemporary jazz around in Jumpin' In with myself, H.
And me, Chris. Yes, welcome along to this week's show, and I think it's fairly safe to say autumn has finally landed, which for our recent cruise ship visitors meant that some saw a rain-lashed foggy Ramsey with near storm-force winds. On the following day, the visitors saw the island bathed in glorious sunshine. Either way, they all found nothing at the end of the pier, nor a tram in sight unless they walked for the first mile. Well, if staying in with your feet up is more your thing, then join us for the next hour or so of great music, as H said. And H, as you've cruised through the week, what helped you find your sea legs so that it wasn't just the chandeliers that were swinging, and what failed to float your boat and left you a little tender?
You know what, there's always good stuff somewhere around, I have to say. It's either good, very good, or excellent, and the bad stuff I don't even bother with at all these days. We'll be marking, of course, both of us, the passing of the great drummer John Marshall, a bit of big band Harriet, on which he actually features. I think he does in any case. And a couple, which I picked up recently in proper CD format, from Dave Douglas, a wonderful one, and the latest from the brilliant drummer Jonathan Blake.
And from me, Mike Gibbs Orchestra. Kick off, we look ahead, we miss the forest, and to begin, here's Mike Gibbs with Tanglewood 63.
Thank you.
Mike Gibbs Orchestra with Tanglewood 63 from the album of the same name, originally released on Derham. And remember them? Back in 1970. Yeah, 1970. It seems like yesterday, doesn't it? I'm sure many of you, as H said, were saddened, as we were, to hear of the passing of the great drummer John Marshall, who died aged 82 last week. Perhaps best remembered for his contributions to Soft Machine from 1972 onward, including the Soft Machine Legacy Band, right up to their last recording in 2022. He was also a founder member of Nucleus with Ian Carr and played on 2 of the 3 fantastic Eberhard Weber Colours albums and many, many others. So we're going to play a few tracks in his memory, including that one, Tanglewood 63, featuring a band who read like the who's who of British jazz. I won't name them all, but for starters, Jeff Klein on bass, Chris Spedding on guitar, Gordon Beck, John Taylor and Mick Pine, all on piano and keyboards, Alan Skidmore, Brian Smith, John Sermon, Stan Sultzman, Tony Roberts on saxes and woodwind, Chris Pine, Dave Haller, Malcolm Griffiths on trombone, Harry Beckett, Henry Lowther, Kenny Wheeler and Nigel Carter on trumpets. What kind of front line is that? Alfie Rees-Stickhart on tuba, Frank Ricotti on the vibes and percussion, plus a double string quartet, and of course John Marshall on the drums.
Terrific.
More from John later on.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of cracking tracks with John on as well. And whilst we never actually got to interview the man himself, we saw him on several occasions, United Jazz and Rock Ensemble, and I think the last time we saw him might have been with John Warren and John Sermon at the London Jazz Festival.
Well, we had a brief word, but he wasn't able to do an interview. We had a brief word. That was at the London Jazz Festival
London Jazz a while back.
4 years ago.
And there was that wonderful occasion when, again, just one of those weird ones which you think is delicious, when we were actually in Newham's, a wonderful
delicious,
old worldy cake shop in Kew, wearing jazz T-shirts and chatting, and a lady of a certain age said, "Oh, hello," and noticed the T-shirts. And we've been chatting about Eberhard Weber, who sadly suffered a stroke a few years back. And she said, "Oh, yes, poor Eberhard." And we said, "Oh, gosh, do you know?" She said, yes, know him well, lovely man, he's suffering. And of course, my husband, who's that? John Marshall. Yeah, and it was Mrs. John Marshall. She said, "Oh, he's just outside in the car, I'm just getting some pasties," or something along those lines. It was absolutely wonderful. More from John shortly. Before that, I'm digging back into some CDs, and that, along with the wonderful music we get sent from all manner of people these days, and thank you very much indeed if you are helping supply Jumpin In with the great sounds we get on a regular basis now from around the world. Albums coming up, albums just released, releases, such like. Truly is a global music, but I still like getting the CDs when we're out and about, and this is one I picked up actually at a wonderful CD stall, which was at the most recent jazz festival we went to in Dinan. First time we've seen a really, really decent CD stall in quite a long time. And it had all sorts of great stuff on it, including this one from someone I've been a great fan of for many a year and is still incredibly prodigious, the trumpeter Dave Douglas. It's not his latest. It's one of a myriad. It's probably about 1,000 albums back, the rate he releases them. But it was one I didn't have and I've been enjoying very muchly on the old turntable of late. And by that I mean a CD player, of course, or at least a CD spinner. And this one's called Blues to Steve Lacy. Super prolific, super tasteful, super talented, great educator, travels widely. Don't think he ever stops. He's a sort of like a Pat Metheny of the trumpet in many ways. Dave Douglas, we did actually interview him many years ago. I'd love to catch up with him again. We did a piece back when it was How About Jazz, I think, many moons ago, backstage after a gig somewhere, possibly in Brecon, if my memory serves correct.
Yeah, I think right.
And I can't even remember who he was playing with, but frankly, he's another, like I said, he's a mixture somehow or other. He's prolific as Pat Metheny, or at least as long-living and sort of always at it and always travelling and touring and educating, but he's a bit of a Miles Davis when it comes to his attitude to albums, and that every album seems to shoot off in a different direction. So one thing, it might be all very sort of classical or third streamy, then it'll be a virtually solo piece, then he'll go all electronic and do something really sort of funky, then he'll do something really experimental, then he'll go back to just all acoustic again, and on he goes. It's always a different, you never sort of get exactly the same sort of thing twice. Sometimes it's a trio, sometimes it's quartet, sometimes it's big band. On he goes. He just plays in every genre and loves moving all the time and working with different players. 2006 that album was, unbelievably. It sounds great, I must admit. I told it, there literally must have been another 30 or 40 albums from him since then. If you go to his Greenleaf website, they just churn them out literally at a rate of knots, 1 or 2 a month, I think he releases of some sort or other. In any case, always good. I've got very few dufters when it comes to when it comes to Dave Douglas. Wonderful all the time. Dave on trumpet, Donny McCaslin on tenor sax, Yuri Kane Fender Rhodes. Surround yourself with good people is always a good start too, isn't it? James Genus on bass, Clarence Payne on the drums, and the album was Meaning and Mystery.
You're quite right. There are so many to choose from, but not a bad thing, and keeps it interesting for him as well, doesn't it? I'm sure. Next from me, a new voice hailing from the New Orleans scene. Here's a title track from saxophonist Willie Morris's debut album, Conversation Starter. Yes, very nice indeed. Willie Morris there on sax with not the title track, as it turns out, just the way that happens sometimes when we get sent these pre-release albums. They all have the same album name next to each track. I had to wait until it scrolled right across to get the name. It's Cries. Sounded quite a happy bit of tears for me, but anyway, fantastic stuff. Starting off with New Orleans, Willie was an undergraduate at Illinois before he went on to take his master's in jazz studies at the prestigious Juilliard School in New York, where he now teaches, and what a great band too. Patrick Cornelius joins Willie on sax, and incidentally, he's got a great new album out too. We'll feature that on a later show, no doubt. John Davis at the piano, Addie Meyerson on the bass, and E.J. Strickland on the drums. The album acknowledges hard bop while flavouring with modal sensibilities, and the whole thing swings throughout, I think. Taking the lead on the title track there, not the title track, I'm saying it again. Taking the lead on Cries was yes. Willie himself. We got a second solo from Patrick. And I think the Conversation Starter album does exactly what it says on the tin. And the one thing it shouts as, watch out for Willie Morris in the future. Thanks very much to Positone for sending us a copy of that.
He sounds like he should be a folk musician in the name, like Willie Morris, doesn't he? So,
or an old bluesman with a sort of beaten-up dobro guitar sitting on a stoop.
Definitely the wrong genre, I think he's playing in. Fine player, though, it has to be said. Another fine player, the late, great Joe Harriott, who came over and I think died pretty much penniless despite his amazing talent. But, playing in jazz, you know what they say, make yourself a millionaire in jazz, start with 2 million. And it ticks 2 boxes, this one, because it is a CD I picked up a while back, Big Band Harriet, Mike Garrick Jazz Orchestra from 2004, playing some of the music from Joe's great canon of tunes that he did over the years with his various bands, and recorded with the Mike Garrick Jazz Orchestra 20-odd years ago now to celebrate that music. Also, it does feature John Marshall on the drums. However, unfortunately, it's one of those albums where half of the drumming duty is down to John and the other half is down to Alan Jackson, and it doesn't list who does which track. So have a listen to this one. It's a great track in any case. I'm hoping it's John on the drums. If you're a better man than I, or woman as the case may be, you might be able to tell whether this is Alan Jackson, John Marshall. Both great drummers, of course, and a great tune as well. This one's simply called Spiritual Blues. Great stuff, and more to the point, just as we've been listening to that, I've been checking out just to see, and in some of the smaller print, yes, happy news, it was John Marshall. So if you were listening and thought, that's John Marshall, you're right, it was. On the actual track, it does say John Marshall on the drums there in the smaller print, which I couldn't find last night, but this life of me I was looking around. Spiritual Blues, Martin Hathaway on the first two choruses there on Joe's tune, and the piano taking the solo, 12 horns, and then forwards at the end with John Marshall from Big Band Harriet. And again, a bit of a who's who of British jazz playing on that one, as you can imagine. Mike Garrick at the piano, and then you've got the likes of Mark Armstrong, Dominic Ashworth, Jamie Anderson, Adrian Fry, Martin Hathaway, etc. Steve Waterman, Tom Richards, Matt Waits, Quentin Collins, all sorts of great players. Came out not that long ago, compilation on the Jazzland or Jazza label. Mike Garrick Jazz Orchestra plays Big Band Harriet. And there's a lovely little quote from Joe at the beginning there saying, I want to see jazz grow and absorb all the other idioms and not be treated as if it were just an isolated art form. I have one pet hate that one couldn't think for oneself unless one emigrated to a place like the United States, because, well, whether one goes to the States or is living in the jungle, one can think. And he's just talking about, really, seeing jazz become accepted, which I don't really think he did during his day. But hopefully, if he's still watching, he might be thinking it's going in the right direction.
Yeah. And next from me, a bit of a Latin direction from a young pianist up and coming, but although his sixth album, again, first time I'd even come across him, Emilio Tubal. And his last release is called Futuro, and this is definitely the title track. Lovely lilting melody with a dynamic rhythm section driving it along. The album is reflective of Tubal's experience during this harrowing and uncertain times following COVID, he said, with the added sadness of mourning the loss of his father. The music heard on the album came to life in the studio at the end of 2021 when his post-trio was joined by special guests drummer Brian Adler, vibes man Chris Dingman, guitarist Fede Dyers and clarinetist to fine effect Sam Sadigurski. Tubal explains futuro, or future in English, is the word that synthesises all these emotions that I felt during that period. The idea that suddenly we were living in a dystopian world not far from what I'd seen on those end-of-the-world movies I used to watch as a kid, such as Mad Max and Blade Runner. It's sad that we have to agree with a bit of that sentiment. The resulting album is an eclectic modern collection, I think, of singular stuff which represents his ruminations and contemplations about his own personal loss and grieving, and of course about the future of the planet as well.
Terrific stuff. It is Sweet and Swing. Chris and H with you through until the top of the hour.
It's not Sweet and Swing at all. That was yesterday. You old swinger.
Dear. That's age catching up, isn't it? Jumpin', it was Sweet and Swing yesterday. Yeah. Don't forget it. Yes, it'll be on next Friday.
That's on the podcast too. You can catch up with that as well.
It is Jumpin' In. It is definitely Jumpin' In with Chris and myself, H. And returning to finish off with John Marshall in the company of one of his long-term collaborators, or vice versa if you like, the great John Sermon. Here, a couple of tracks, a mere 30-odd years apart.
Hi there, this is John Sermon and you're listening to Jumpin In on Manx Radio.
Marvellous stuff. Yeah, our tribute to the late, great John Marshall, who passed away sadly just in the last week or so in his 80s. Great player, wonderful chap as well. A quick two there from me, both with John Sermon, long-time collaboration, starting off with Way Back When from the album of the same name, 1969, with the track Way Back When, Part 4, and then the wonderful quartet of John Sermon, John Taylor, Chris Lawrence and John Marshall at the drums from a 1994 album. It was, just trying to find the date. Stranger Than Fiction, the John Sermon Quartet on ECM.
Well, that is just about it, but I did promise you another track from the wonderful John as well. There were countless Soft Machine, Nucleus and Colours tracks I could have chosen, but many ran to over 20 minutes, so I had to pick something a little bit shorter. That doesn't stop you from digging them out and settling back and really getting enveloped in that wonderful music, with great hours on all of those for listening and box sets available for all three of those, Nucleus, Colours and Soft Machine. But for now, here's Eberhard Weber, Charlie Mariano, Rainer Bruninghaus and John Marshall on No Trees, He Said, from the final Colours release, Little Movements from 1980. See you next week.
Look after yourselves.
Bye for now.